Hi, my name is Nix and in this video we'll learn how to install Home Manager on Windows Subsystem for Linux or WSL. So if you want to have reproducible configuration for your neovim setup or your Git client, you could use Home Manager to do that. So Home Manager, as the documentation says, Home Manager is a Nix part tools for reproducible management of contents of users' home directories. So basically Home Manager is a user level version of Nix OS. So in example here we can see using Nix language we configure our Git client. So this line will enable Git installed on user level instead of system level like Nix OS, and we can also set the configuration like username and user email. So we don't have to configure imperatively using git config -- global user email. Instead we can just run one command from Home Manager CLI and it will activate our configuration. It will have git config file on this path like this. So since Home Manager is tied to user level configuration instead of system level like Nix OS, it can be installed on theoretically any Unix-like operating system. So there are two main ways to install Home Manager, the flake way and non-flake way. In this tutorial we'll use flakes, and in the Nix flakes installation we have three ways to install it. So the first one in Nix Darwin, which is like Nix OS equivalent on Mac OS, and exclusive for Nix OS we have Nix OS module, and for non-Nix OS Linux distribution we have standalone setup. Basically Nix OS module here means it will integrate the Home Manager setup with Nix OS, and the standalone setup here means the Home Manager will have its own CLI and it will configure itself instead of relying on Nix OS command line. So in this video, since we will use Ubuntu on WSL, we will do a standalone setup and using flakes. So while we can just follow the manual, I will do the easier way and I will explain what happened at every steps. So go to your terminal, and first of all, if you don't have Nix installed on your WSL, please watch my previous video to install one. So first let's create directory in our home. I would say WSL home and cd into that directory. So in later step, we will initiate a Git repository in this directory and we will push it to GitHub. So you can have declarative configuration of your .files, and also you can see the history of your changes, and you can also restore and undo and reapply the past configurations. So the first command we will run here is Nix shell command. So what this command will do is it will create a virtual environment where certain programs are installed. So let's look at quick example. So if I run neofetch here, it will fail because we don't have neofetch installed on our system, but we can run nix shell nix packages as neofetch. And we will wait for Nix to download the program. So we are now in a new shell and I can run neofetch and it should be fine. So here we are in a virtual environment in a new shell and we have neofetch installed. So let's exit this shell. So now we should be on the global shell and we shouldn't have neofetch installed. So let's run neofetch real quick. And neofetch not found. So you can think of this as like virtual environment with temporary installation of certain programs. So what happens when we run this command is the Nix shell commands take multiple arguments where each argument is a program that we want to install. So the hash is a separator here, and the string before hash is reference to a certain repository or certain directory. And in this case, Nix packages is special alias to Nix packages repository on GitHub, and neofetch here is the name of the program we want to install. So this is basically how you run like virtually imperatively install programs on Nix. Instead of installing it on global environment, we will create a temporary shell with certain programs installed. So the program we will need to initiate our Home Manager configuration is Home Manager CLI. So we can do that by running nix shell nix packages, and the name of the program is Home Manager. So we are in the virtual shell and we should be able to run Home Manager -- version. So we have Home Manager installed. What we want to do is to initiate our Home Manager configuration. So Home Manager conveniently have init command which will create a like working hello world example of Home Manager configuration. So we'll run Home Manager init in our current working directory, and typo. So So this should create two files, which is flake.nix file and home.nix file. Let's take a look at these two files. So the flake.nix file here, you can think of flake.nix file as, if you use Rust, it's like cargo.toml, and if you use JavaScript, it's like package.json. So there are two main purposes of this flake.nix file. So the first one is inputs. So if you have dependencies to another repository for any of your Nix file, you can put it into inputs. For example, here we will depend on Nix packages repository and home manager repository, and the outputs is like the standard way to communicate between any Nix CLI to Nix files. So we can see in this line here, we are exposing home configuration.nix hero. So this is how when we run home manager CLI, it knows which configuration we want to activate. So this flake.nix file, you can think of it as like entry point for any Nix related CLI, including Nix CLI, NixOS CLI, or home manager CLI, as an entry point to recognize which Nix code the user is referring to. So home configurations here is what home manager will require us to export on flake.nix file to know which configuration we are using. So the important part here is we use system x86 64 Linux, which means it will run on this system. If you use macOS, the system name should be different. It should be something like x86 64 Darwin or something. So while this WSL configuration will work and reusable on NixOS if you have like two machines or multiple machines with multiple Linux distributions, including NixOS, it should be reusable as long as the architecture or system type is same. But I'm not sure with macOS one because it have different system. Unfortunately, I cannot confirm because I don't have macOS. Another important part here, we are exposing a home configuration named Nix Hero. This one is taken from username and generated by default by the home manager init command. And the important thing here is it refers to a file named home.nix in the same directory, while this flake.nix file is an entry point to all the Nix related commands. The home.nix file is where you actually configure your home configuration. So it already have plenty of useful commands here. So we'll come back to this configuration file later. So what we just did here is create a file. So we want to actually activate the home manager configuration based on these two files. So we can do that by running home manager switch --flake dot, which means we will use the flake.nix file available in current working directory, hash for the separator, and we will use Nix Hero since the name of the configuration, as we see before, is Nix Hero. So we will run this. So now it will download all the dependencies we require on our config, and it will build the configuration files, and it will symlink those configurations to our home directory. So now the command finished successfully, but practically there should be no difference because our home.nix is still empty and we didn't enable anything. So let's quickly create a change, then actually install something. So as we saw before, we don't have neofetch installed. Neofetch not found, so let's install that. So you can install a package or program in home manager by adding the package name into this field. So packages.neofetch, for example. By the way, you can go to search.nixos.org/packages to search for a package name, and this one is the name you want to use. So if you want to have ipfetch installed, you will use this name and put this into our home.nix configuration. So in our case, it was indeed neofetch. We will save this and quit this, and we will run this same command just like before. So neofetch should be installed on our home configuration now. Okay, now it's installed. Hooray! So that sounds unimpressive since it just installed what we specify. So we will see another features of home manager. So we can see here we have fields, right? Like home.username, home.home directory, home.packages, home.session variables, programs.home manager. So the way we can know all the fields available is by looking at the main page. We can run main home configuration.nix. It will show all the available home manager configuration and what it does. So for example, we want to set up Starship. We can search for Starship, which is a program that set up our terminal prompt. And for example, we can see programs.starship.enable. So let's quickly add that to our home configuration. Programs.starship enable. So we expect when we activate the configuration, we will see some like very simple prompt. So let's save this, and we can see here this is our default bash prompt, and it only have one line, and it's just bare bone and very basic prompt. And when we install Starship, it should look like simplistic, and it should have 2 rows, and it should have like empty lines between commands. So let's activate the home configuration. You can see the prompt doesn't change, so maybe we should open a new shell, but the prompt is still the same. So this indeed failed to work. While we successfully activate the configuration, we don't see the prompt because Starship requires bash integration, and our bash still have bash rc that are default bash rc created by Ubuntu instead of the one created by Home Manager. So the reason we don't have Home Manager configure our bash is because we don't enable it yet. So we can enable it by programs.bash.enable. This should configure bash and its bash rc to be configured by Home Manager instead of using the one from Ubuntu. So let's save this. So let's run the command again, home manager switch --flake .#Nix hero. So this should configure bash to be configured by Home Manager instead of the default one from Ubuntu, and the command failed. So as you can see here, the bash rc file is in the way of blah 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 nix store bash rc file. So this means we already have a bash rc file which was created by default by Ubuntu, but instead we want to use the one from Home Manager, and Home Manager switch command do not want to delete this without user knowing. So we need to explicitly remove this bash rc file, or if you are just lazy, you can run the command with -bflag and followed by the backup suffix, for example bckp. So let's run this. So this time the command runs successfully, and we can see the warning here. The existing file .bashrc is in the way and will be removed to bashrc bckp. So we can see our home directory. We can see the new bashrc file which was configured by Home Manager, and the old bashrc file which was renamed to bckp. So the command successfully run, and so when we open a new shell, as you can see, this is the old prompt and this one is new prompt from Starship. So that is how you can install Starship on Home Manager. So we have successfully created home configuration that enables Starship by default, and now we want to initialize this directory as a Git repository. So we'll run git init. So we just successfully initialized a Git repository. I want to show you one thing here. If you run the same command, home manager switch --flake .#Nix hero, if you switch the configuration now, it will fail and says flake.nix does not exist. So this is a default behavior of Nix Flake. If you have flake.nix inside a Git repository, all the files that are not tracked by Git will not be recognized by the Nix related command line, including Home Manager. So the way we can handle this is by actually adding files. So if we see here git status, we can see none of the files are tracked by Git, and we run git add -a to add all the files, and we run the git status again. We can see all the Nix files are tracked by Git, so we can rerun the command again. The command should run successfully. So let's create another example, right? So let's say we want to install neovim. If you don't know what the keyword, you can always open the main page, but I already know how to configure the neovim. It's programs.neovim.enable true. And optionally, I also want, when I type v instead of nvim, it will enter neovim. So I want to set up an alias. So we will type programs.neovim.valias equals to true. Also, I'll do the same for vim. So this v alias and vim alias, you can see it these options are available in main page. So I will save this. So let's quickly activate the configuration. So now if we type v, it should open in neovim, but it's not. So apparently we need to open a new shell, and when we run v, it will open neovim instead of the v. Next thing we want to do is separating the configuration to new files. So we'll create a new file named neovim.nix. So we will move neovim related configs to this new neovim.nix file. So let's quickly copy the configurations. So let's save both buffers, and we will open flake.nix file, and we will add the neovim.nix to our modules. So we will run the home manager switch command again, and the command should fail and it says neovim.nix does not exist. This is because when we run the git status again, neovim.nix is untracked. So we can easily fix this by git add neovim.nix. Now if we run git status, it is now tracked, and when we run the same command, it should be successfully run. So let's open a new shell just to make sure it works. When we run v, it should open neovim. So that is how you split your configuration into multiple files. So that is how we can configure our home configuration using Home Manager. It is declarative and it can be activated with a single command. So let's create some README, right? So the next time you have new Windows installation or new Ubuntu installation, you want to initialize the setup in one command. And since our configuration files are managed by Git, we can just clone the repository and activate the configuration, right? So let's create the script for that. So this is how we tell ourselves in future how to initialize this configuration with single command. So we'll run nix shell, nix packages, home manager, and after that we will run command flag. So this command flag means we will run a shell command, and we will run the command as if the home manager is installed on our system. So we'll run sh-c to run multiple commands to use shell syntax. So we will run home manager switch -- flake dot, assuming our repository name is WSL home. WSL home has, assuming our username is Nix hero, and it should install our configuration in this single command. Even without home manager installed, as long as you have Nix installed, this command should run fine. But we want to go further here because typically our home configuration is in private repository, and especially if we use GitHub, we can also include the clone command into this one command. So let's run gh repo clone nix hero, and we'll specify the repository name, for example WSL home. So this will work just fine, but we want to add depth equals to 1, and we also want to log in using gh command. So these three commands will authenticate us, log in either with browser or anything, and it will clone our private repository, and it will run the home manager with flag file inside the clone repository directory. One thing we forgot here is to add nix packages #gh, because that is required to run gh command. So if you have your home manager configuration set up, you can run this command, you can copy this, and it should run fine on all your system. This command is all you need to initialize your system. All you need to have before running this is Nix. You don't need any other programs. So that is very handy, at least for me. So that is how we initialize our repository without any dependencies. So basically that's it. And in future video, maybe I will do home manager configurations that are specific to neovim. I wish I could have done it in one video, but I've been speaking English for 50 minutes for the first time in my life, and I'm really exhausted. I think I will end it here. This is essentially my first time speaking English unscripted, and this is my first time posting a video in live demo style. So thank you for watching, and like and subscribe for more Nix content. The name is Nix Hero.